Alright everyone, welcome back. So the other day in my Star Wars video, I was talking a little bit about David Benioff and DB Wise, and how I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the Star Wars trilogy that they're going to be producing soon. But I'm not overly excited about it, and that is mainly because of my thoughts on their other big project that they've worked on over the last decade or so, Game of Thrones. Now, I was a massive Game of Thrones fan a few years ago, massive. Not as much anymore, mainly because I don't know, you just lose interest in things over time. But probably the biggest reason was because the show just didn't stay as good as it used to be. Like, when I first got into Game of Thrones, it was round about when season 3 was coming out, from what I remember. When I first watched it, I was amazed by how great the show was. I fell in love with it right from the get-go. And it was great, it honestly was. Like, the first 3 seasons were great, in my opinion. The 4th season, not quite as great, but it was still pretty good. And then the 5th and 6th seasons were just bad. Especially season 6. Like, season 6, I just lost interest completely after watching season 6. It was just not good at all. I didn't even bother watching the last season. So, but anyway, the final season of the show is coming out this year. I'll be honest, I'm not really excited about it, but I'm somewhat interested in how it ends because, like I said before, for a good 3-4 years, I was, really invested in this. Like I said, I've watched every episode of the first 6 seasons. The first 4 seasons, I've watched every episode numerous times. And I've actually read all the novels as well. So yes, I am one of those guys. But in all seriousness, the books themselves, I'll be honest, I enjoyed reading the books when I did a few years ago. But even they aren't perfect as well. Like, the first 3 books, in my opinion, are amazing. Especially the 3rd book. The 3rd book was just probably the best fantasy book I've ever read, to be honest. Probably one of the best books I've ever read in general, to be honest. But then you get to the 4th and 5th books, and it's nowhere near as good. So in all fairness to Benioff and Wise, I understand how the show did drop in quality, at least to some degree, because the 4th and 5th books were just not that good at all. I mean, they have their moments, to be fair. They definitely do have their moments, but overall, the story just becomes boring and drags on forever. And I will admit, George R. R. Martin, I'm a big fan of his work, especially in the Game of Thrones A Song of Ice and Fire series, But even he, dropped the ball as well later on. Like, it has been, I believe, 8 years now since the last novel was released, and it doesn't look like the next one's going to be released anytime soon. So for the most part, it looks like the TV show will be the official ending to the series, or saga, whatever you want to say. So I am interested to see what how they end it. But yeah, the 4th and 5th book just weren't that good at all. And I feel like that reflects very much in the show. When Benioff and Wise were adapting the show, when they were adapting anything from the first 3 novels, they did it really well. In fact, he even says himself in an interview a few years ago that the big reason why they wanted to turn this into a TV show was because of the Red Wedding. That was the single big event they wanted to adapt more than anything else. And if you look at it, everything up to the Red Wedding's pretty much perfect. After that, it starts to go downhill. Like, I enjoyed season 4, but when they start adapting stuff from the later novels, it just doesn't, it starts to become weird. It's just not quite as tight as it was beforehand. And when you get to season 5 and you get to some of the storylines they do in season 5, like for example when they go to Dorne, yeah, that was bad. I don't care what anyone says, that was really bad. But then you also have episodes like Hardhome where they completely blow me away even. And it's still one of my favourite episodes of the show, period. But today's video, the main topic that I wanted to get onto was how Game of Thrones is going to end, and what I think will happen in the last season, and what I want to happen. Now, what I want to happen probably won't happen at all, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyway, out of interest. So what I think will happen in the end is I do believe there's going to be this big battle, because there has to be, let's be honest. And I do think that in the end, the White Walkers will probably be defeated. There probably will be a big sacrifice, but it will probably be a character that no one really cares about. What will happen is the dragons will probably end up destroying the the White Walkers, and they will probably die in the process. I think they will sacrifice themselves, along with some other characters, like I says, that aren't that important to the story. And then I think Daenerys and Jon will end up marrying and take the Iron Throne for themselves, which I really don't want to see happen. But let's be honest, it probably will. What I want to see happen is I want to see something completely out of left field in the last season, something that no one's going to expect. Because fuck it, at this point, it doesn't matter anymore, you know? What I want to see happen is I want to see both Jon Snow and Daenerys both die in very different ways. I want to see Jon Snow fighting a battle and the battle just be too much for him and lose, possibly to the Night's King, but I would prefer it if it was just a random White Walker he was fighting, and just die and just let that be that. Doesn't have to be a heroic sacrifice or anything. It could be, possibly, but I would prefer it if it was just he dies in battle and that's it. And I want Daenerys to get betrayed in some way and possibly stabbed in the back by one of her allies, possibly Varys, possibly Tyrion. You know, someone that seems like shady, that she shouldn't be able to trust completely. Honestly, I think it'd be interesting if Dario came back and, you know, found some way to, but they're not going to do that. But yeah, that is what I hope happens at the end of Game of Thrones. I hope both Jon and Daenerys die, and I hope, in all honesty, I do hope the White Walkers do get defeated. I think, though, that if they were to be defeated, there would have to be a great cost to that. In other words, I think the land of Westeros would have to be completely fractured and vulnerable. It would have to be like, imagine like after World War II, how Europe was, you know. Europe wasn't, the countries in Europe, even the countries that did win the war, essentially, like Britain and France, etc., Russia, they weren't exactly prosperous, you know. They were suffering from having to rebuild, and that's what Westeros should have. And who should be leading the rebuilding process of Westeros? Well, in my opinion, the person who should end up in the Iron Throne at the end of the show should be Tyrion. I think that would be interesting because I don't think anyone has ever expected Tyrion to become king. He's always sort of been the black sheep of the Lannisters, and I think it'd be so ironic to see Tywin get his wish and desires for his legacy to continue, but through, of all people, it has to continue through Tyrion, the son that he hated and despised. It would be nice to see someone that everyone, rather than someone that people don't like on the throne, like Littlefinger, who I know is dead at this point, or Cersei. Why not someone like Tyrion? It would be satisfying to see him win the Game of Thrones in the end. And like I said, there would be no better ruler than someone like Tyrion Lannister in power in the aftermath of the war, because Westeros would have to rebuild. But we'll see. So yeah, that was my thoughts on how Game of Thrones will end, and my hopes at least. Let's be honest though, we're probably going to get the generic ending. We're probably not going to get the really interesting ending. And even, put it this way, even if we didn't get the ending that I want, personally, I would at least be interested to see something different. Even if the White Walkers end up winning, it's at least something different. But we'll see, so we will. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.